Who are the 6 wide receivers you need to bang the table for and draft as sleepers in 2025 fantasy football? We tell you on this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm running about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com. My co-host, Michelle Majuk, is off today, so we will get to the Minnesota Vikings. That's the next team in our off-season previews. If you've been following that series, we're almost through the NFC North, so one last team to go. We'll break down J.J. McCarthy, Justin Jefferson, and the Vikings on Friday's show. But today, we're going to pivot as I'm flying solo, and we're going to look at the 6 sleepers I'm targeting, and you should target as well in every fantasy football redraft league this season. And these are guys that are all over the board from early to really late there for your fantasy team, from a wide receiver 1 all the way through a wide receiver 4. So we reveal those players. These are just players that are great values all across the rankings there that you need to be targeting in every league format. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's dive into our first player here. It is Jaxon Smith-Njigba of the Seahawks. Now, it would seem that he's already broken out, right? If you look at it last year, he was the wide receiver 10 total points in half-point PPR, but only wide receiver 22 on average. Right now, he's ranked closer to that total scoring with wide receiver 12. But why I like him at wide receiver 12? Because I think he can end up as a top 5, top 6 scorer. So that makes him a sleeper because, again, you can get really great value after a lot of those big names are there, including like an Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think I would look at JSN a little bit later this year as that big breakout player who can dominate and carry your team. So there's a lot of reasons for this. You look at the new offense, first of all. I like Clint Kubiak in Seattle and what he can do calling plays. You also have a new quarterback there, Sam Darnold. He likes to have a go-to guy and can go to him all over the field. JSN is going to be the clear number 1. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are gone. That's 179 vacated wide receiver targets, second most in the league, only to the Los Angeles Rams. Speaking of the Rams, they did add Cooper Kupp here to help replace what they had in Metcalf and Lockett, but JSN already had a big season last year. Cooper Kupp is on the fade here as he gets older on his second team. I know he's a Washington native and could feel a little bit of rejuvenation in this particular offense, but again, new quarterback changes things a little bit, but Geno Smith did go crazy with JSN in a lot of games. There were some very high volume games. There were some inconsistency as well because we had to deal with other receivers into the mix of note, and Metcalf and Lockett had been there together for a long time in Seattle. But JSN, the torch was officially passed last year. Now it's time for JSN to star as a number 1 receiver. Let's not forget, in his draft class just 3 years ago, he was the number 1 wide receiver taken. So that's how much talent he had. There were questions about could he stay healthy and durable, much like Justin Jefferson. Could he line up elsewhere from the slot? Well, he's proved that and more here in this particular scheme that they've had, and he's done it in 2 different offenses. Now he gets a third offense. Last year it did help him quite a bit with the Ryan Grubb offense that carried over from Washington, but Kubiak is also going to take full advantage of this receiver. We saw that with Chris Olave to some degree as a number 1 when Kubiak was with the Saints. Of course, Olave and JSN were teammates at Ohio State, so cut from the same cloth, style of receiver. I think JSN is a little bit more dynamic. Again, reminds me a lot of the other hyphenate, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Again, St. Brown has developed into a consistent top 6 receiver, 4, 5, 6. That's kind of where he's producing and ranked every year. Now it's time for JSN to take that leap in this particular offense. So he's my number 1 sleeper. When I say sleeper, again, value that you're going to get here at wide receiver, where you might end up with a wide receiver 1 in the top 5 that you're going to get 7 picks after that at his position. Again, a rising star. I really love this kid, and he put it all together at the end of last year with volume. He's going to get the volume. He's going to get the production, the big plays, and all the way through the red zone. Another guy that I really like that you should go after in all your drafts right now. Again, Jason, look, you may not be in the best position to get him a wide receiver 12, but you can get this player anywhere. Wide receiver 26. Last year, he was the wide receiver 45 in average during his rookie season. Wide receiver 32 in total scoring. So in that sense, he was a wide receiver 3 as a rookie. I think he's got a massive ceiling here. That's Xavier Worthy of the Chiefs. 106 vacated wide receiver targets on Kansas City's roster. And that is even including Rashee Rice coming back. So you have Rice in the mix, and people might be looking at Rice as a better value given what he did a couple seasons ago when healthy as the new receiver in town in Kansas City. But we all saw the Super Bowl. We all saw the type of ceiling Xavier Worthy can have with his speed. And they added more speed to this offense. They retained it there with Marquise Hollywood Brown. They want to throw the ball downfield and stretch it. And you have like random guys gone, like a Justin Watson. He's not in the mix. They're a couple years removed now from Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So those type of receivers are not here to steal key snaps and reps and routes from this player. Xavier Worthy, again, Rashee Rice's injury really opened the door for him to take over right away as a rookie. It took some time because he had to get on the same page with Patrick Mahomes. It is a history there in general with Andy Reid and rookie wide receivers. They need to have full trust in that receiver to go nuts. Well, in the comeback, the furious comeback, it didn't really have a chance there with them falling so behind the Eagles in the Super Bowl, but Xavier Worthy was unstoppable in that game. And you were talking about a pretty good Eagles secondary, right, with Quinion Mitchell, Cooper DeJean in the middle of the field. They just could not stop the big plays. Of course, they let them have some of that, but it takes talent against anybody in that big stage to deliver that type of game. So it's not a similar situation to what we saw with Gabe Davis in the playoffs with the Bills, and everyone was jumping on him. No, Worthy is a first-round pick. Gabe Davis was a bit of a sleeper, stretched the field, and then we've seen what's happened with him since. But Worthy was a first-round pick that the Bills facilitated the Chiefs taking. So we know the talent is there for Worthy. We've seen the blinding speed, the record-setting 40 at the combine. They want to throw the ball back more downfield with Patrick Mahomes, get that element back, the field stretching ability. So that's all lining up here for Xavier Worthy, where Rashee Rice is going to be more the complimentary guy. They're playing the big slot, playing on the outside as a possession guy. Worthy's going to be their big play target, and that's actually a good thing as they transition because that's been a missing element that they need. They need to take advantage of Mahomes' big arm, get it downfield. They've been lacking in that area, maybe taking too much of what's available when teams give it to them. It's interesting, the Eagles were protecting a lead, and that's when they had a whole bunch of big plays come to Xavier Worthy instead of just protecting against that. So that showed his speed and quickness were on display, even in trail mode for the Chiefs. Now, Chiefs are not used to trailing much, so that also hurts sometimes Mahomes and the ability to throw downfield. But we know the Chiefs, there's a little bit of vulnerability there with this team. They lost a few more pieces defensively. They can be had a little bit now in the AFC, and things are going. They just got beat in the Super Bowl, so they're going to have to rev it up again with Patrick Mahomes. They're going to get bigger challenges here from the Ravens, the Bills. The Bengals should rise as a threat as well. The Texans are also a team to watch out for in the AFC picture. So that's going to make the Chiefs rev up their offense a little bit more, and they're in a potential lot of shootouts this year. They play the Ravens, they play the Bills, they play the Lions. They play all these teams that can put up a lot of points, and if that's the case, Worthy is going to see nice volume downfield in the passing game. So definitely these two guys, I mean, different type of receiver. Smith-Njigba, more short area, quickness, gets open, volume, going to get it done inside a lot as well as outside, where Worthy is basically that field stretcher, that big play guy. But I see a big year here for Xavier Worthy. Again, wide receiver 26 value. Fantastic there. So that's a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2 that you can look at in your drafts. We will go transition more down the board to that wide receiver 3 range with our next 3 picks, and then we'll close the show looking at someone at wide receiver 4 territory that's really undervalued and you must draft here as a sleeper wide receiver. Before we do that, we need to hear from one of our fine sponsors. All right, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. It's so easy to do it. The LinkedIn new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualify candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job absolutely for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, it is time to continue the show and look at our next set of wide receivers that you need to be drafting as sleepers in your fantasy football draft as of what we know is this part of the 2025 offseason. Now, we're going to have our one and only rookie here, spoiler alert. It is Travis Hunter. He is now ranked wide receiver 32, so within the wide receiver threes in the top 36. Now, when we look at his value, it's really good because there's 112 vacated targets here in this offense for the Jaguars. And when I say this offense, it's the offense in general because it's a different scheme here. Liam Cohen coming in and taking over from Doug Peterson and Press Taylor. So you're going to have a lot of things happen in this offense that makes it more dynamic. We've seen Liam Cohen's effect, and he is really good on the number 1 and the number 2 receivers. We saw that last year in Tampa Bay where Mike Evans was fine as a big dude that was making the plays, and he came through again. Well, that role belongs to Brian Thomas Jr. in Jacksonville in his second season. Now, Chris Godwin, we've talked about it a lot. He was the wide receiver 2 in fantasy scoring on average behind Jamar Chase. Unfortunately, he went down with that ankle injury late in the season. Then we saw Jalen McMillan get hot down the stretch. So with the Liam Cohen offense, you know it's going to support 2 wide receivers, and it didn't matter if it was a Godwin dedicated slot guy or if it was McMillan who mainly lined up outside. He's going to be able to sustain 2 wide receivers in top production. You have a top enough quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. Thomas is going to give Hunter favorable opportunities on the other side in coverage. And again, those vacated targets are huge because you have the Christian Kirk ones that are gone. Gabe Davis is gone. So basically all the slot and really the outside key targets. I know Davis was hurt for a lot of the season. There's not much to see there in Jacksonville. The other option is Diami Brown, who came over from the Commanders. So again, a newcomer to this offense and the quarterback as well with Lawrence on top of Hunter. But Hunter's just a maximum talent, and I think they're going to need his ability a little bit more on offense this season. That's my prediction because, again, corner, they're not terrible, right? They have Dyson Campbell. At wide receiver, however, there's a big void. We just talked about all those vacated targets. So, look, I think they went up and were aggressive to get Hunter to think about him offensively a little bit more than defensively, believe it or not. And they want him to be a special part of what they do here with Cohen. So, again, this value is really low. I think he's a solid wide receiver 2 already. I'm starting to feel that here with the early chemistry reports we've gotten, the way that Hunter's kind of taken over here, feeling it with Thomas, feeling it with Lawrence. The early offseason report says it's really looking good for Travis Hunter. And look, they did their due diligence. They were aggressive to trade up to get him. They're going to be aggressive in trying to use him because they have an aggressive play caller that's a little bit pass happy as well. So I do love Travis Hunter here. That value is good. I think it can only go up. Now, people are looking at Tedero McMillan and maybe Matthew Golden a little bit later. We talked about his value, potentially McMillan also in a good spot here with the Panthers to catch some passes, but they don't have the same number of vacated targets, surprisingly. They have actually a bunch of young guys in the mix that are there. We know Emeka Buka, speaking of the Buccaneers, is in a crowd there with McMillan, Godwin, and Evans. So Hunter would seem to be the best option among those rookie wide receivers. So those are skeptical. We want to see what he does first and if he's going to play more corner. But no, I think they look at him as a primary offensive weapon. He could play the big slot. He could play outside. Either position, again, is going to be fruitful to play and produce in Liam Cohen's offense. Now, let's go to another guy staying in the Sunshine State. This is more of he was a dud last year, but he's going to come back and be what we're known to seeing from him this year. That's Jalen Waddle. He's actually one spot ahead of Travis Hunter at wide receiver 31. You might think, okay, that's okay, because you look at the finish last year, he was the wide receiver 56 in average scoring. Before then, he was pretty high up there. I mean, we had him as wide receiver 9, wide receiver 23. So pretty strong finishes inside the top 24 as a wide receiver 1 and then a wide receiver 2. This is with Mike McDaniel in this offense. Now, Tua Tagovailoa missed a lot of time. So they had to compress the Dolphins offense quite a bit last season. And the big thing that hurt Jalen Waddle is that they expanded to use Jonnu Smith and Devin Achane as intermediate targets here for Tua Tagovailoa. Now, that really hurt the offense because they couldn't stretch the field at all. Tyreek Hill was slowing down. Teams saw they were rather compressed, which was a big departure from what they had done before, looking for the home run plays, putting guys in motion, using their quickness, and stretching the field. That was a big change, and that was not, again, in the favor of Waddle because all of a sudden he had competition in that short area catch space. Now, remember when Waddle was just coming up and he had the pre-Tua kind of wide receiver situation at quarterback? Well, he was just an extended handoff guy. That was not good for him last year because they didn't want to do that with Waddle, so they were very careful with the targets. He was also banged up. I don't think he was ever 100% here. So I really think Jalen Waddle is a great value here. Again, he's been too good with Mike McDaniel, and the Dolphins know they stunk last year. He didn't produce a lot of wins when they were using Jonnu Smith in that situation or not using Tyreek Hill to stretch the field and open up the offense. It just didn't look good. And Achane, look, he's a talented guy. I don't think they want to use him too much in the passing game to wear him down that way. I think they need to make sure he holds up a little bit. There's no Raheem Mostert behind him this year. So I think that's a big thing that we have to consider with Achane is they can't really risk him too much and give him a lot of hits in the open field. They're going to have to kind of limit it to the running game a little bit more. So, again, I don't think he's going to hold up if he continues that catch volume. And Jonnu Smith, again, he has not set that precedent anywhere in his career before, whether it was Tennessee or New England. We didn't see that from him as a key receiving role. He just kind of came out of nowhere, especially after Mike Gesicki was pretty much a non-factor for the most part in this Dolphins offense at tight end. So I think some order is going to be restored. These wideouts are going to do their damage here. They are shuffling the wideouts again in Miami, but I do like Waddle. Again, things are changing behind him. Hill, we'll see what his adjusted role is going to be. They still could move Hill, and obviously that would shoot Waddle up the board if he becomes the clear number 1 here for Tua Tagovailoa. So there's a lot of things that you can look at for Waddle. That's all going to point the arrow up, including the history of McDaniel, what they need to do in the near future with McDaniel, and just Waddle's talent in general. I think they're going to tap into it a lot more and use it how it should, a little bit more field stretching, a little bit more quickness, get him the intermediate routes, get him in the short to intermediate space to make big plays after the catch. I think you'll see that a little bit more as Mike McDaniel makes that adjustment. Therefore, you'll have Waddle comfortably shooting up towards wide receiver 2 status versus just an afterthought wide receiver 3 where he's setting up right now. All right, we will get into 2 more guys that you must draft as sleepers here. This is getting a little bit deeper. We're on the cusp of wide receiver 3s, getting outside of the top 36. And then one guy in the 40s that we're going to say you must draft to get really good value and target him for sure in one of your drafts. We'll do that right after this. All right, we are ready to close the show. 2 more guys that you draft as sleepers in your fantasy football leagues in 2025. We have Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Xavier Worthy. So we've represented 4 teams also with Travis Hunter and Jalen Waddle. Now we got 2 more teams to talk about, and one is the Titans, and it's not Tyler Lockett. It is Calvin Ridley here. He was the wide receiver 40 on average last season. Wide receiver 27, however, in total scoring. So he was a little bit better if you just plugged and played him, whenever you were playing best ball, that type of situation. He was better. If you were trying to figure out what he's going to do from week to week, that was a bit frustrating. But if you set it and forget it with Ridley, you're going to get wide receiver 27 numbers. Now, the thing with Ridley, he was wide receiver 36 right now. 36 vacated targets. That's right, 136. That's a ton of vacated targets, folks. And when you look at that, we know a lot of them came from Nick Westbrook-Akine, and they did bring in Lockett to kind of offset them. But Lockett is ancient. He's 33 years old. Calvin Ridley is on the other side of 30 as well. But I compare this a lot to what we expected from Terry McLaurin with Jaden Daniels. He just kind of had a bump up. Now, Terry McLaurin may have already started with a little bit of a higher floor to push him to a ceiling here with McDaniels, or with Daniels, I should say. But when we look at Ridley and Cam Ward, the uncatchable ball was the norm for Ridley last year with Will Levis. They were never really on the same page. Levis is not very accurate with his passes. That was the biggest question mark, right? Could he be accurate, throw downfield, and really put it all together? Well, it's not there. And they're trying to sell this even in the early OTAs and as we go into minicamp as a battle between Ward and Levis. I don't think that's happening at all. I mean, they're going to start Ward from week one, so you don't have to worry about that. Ward throws a pretty ball. It's very accurate. Ward and Ridley have already kind of worked on getting their chemistry get together. Ward has taken control of the offense so far under Brian Callahan and Nick Walls. So when you look at this, those are all good signs, right? When you look at what Ridley can do, again, we were disappointed for sure when we thought, okay, we're clicking with gas when he was playing with Trevor Lawrence just a couple off seasons ago, coming off that year-long suspension with the Falcons. We thought, okay, we're in business again. Calvin Ridley, look, he's not the most exciting name, and he could disappoint, but I think at this cost at wide receiver 36, it's an excellent value because the Titans are going to be better in the passing game. They just are. There's going to be better accuracy. The target and catch rate is going to go up here for Calvin Ridley. He's going to be the clear go-to guy in this offense. They're not going to be as afraid or gun-shy to not throw the ball downfield, which is another thing Ridley does well. I think they'll move him around a little bit also to get him open. So I also like that aspect where they're going to treat him as a number one. They need to do that a little bit more. And it was kind of frustrating in Jacksonville with Doug Peterson where they didn't move in position to succeed. Last year, I think the volume and opportunity were there. The execution in the front end of the passing game was the bigger issue there for Calvin Ridley. And I think you'll see that change quite a bit with Cam Ward. So we're not expecting individually Cam Ward to be a fantasy quarterback we're going after here in his rookie season, but I think he'll facilitate what we want out of Ridley. And again, I'm not saying he's going to go nuts here, but I think you're going to get a good return on a wide receiver 36 that's going to give you maybe wide receiver 2 volume. And that's what you want, right? You want to find those guys that are buried that everyone is down on. And I think when we play the card with Ridley and Waddle, that's what we're looking at. Everyone's like, what are they going to do? The pass is so bad. That's what we did with McLaurin last year, right? He's not exciting. He doesn't score a lot of touchdowns. But again, a quarterback changes everything in these situations. Sometimes you get a guy that becomes a security blanket type for a bunch of wide receiver quarterback situations that are not maybe affected, right? But this one definitely is. I mean, Will Levis just was not good last year. Again, we saw Trevor Lawrence the year before. Again, he was in a bad offense. So now you have a good scheme, a very good quarterback to push it downfield here for Ridley. And again, those vacated targets mean everything lines up. The volume, and Ridley still has talent. He's going to be pushed to be successful. I think you'll see a little bit of rev up from him, just like we saw with McLaurin. He was getting a little stale with the quarterback messes that we had in Washington. Then Jane Daniels cleared that up. And then Cam Ward is going to have a similar effect on the receivers, and Ridley is going to be the biggest beneficiary in the short term. Now, the last guy, and we've talked about him on the show quite a bit, Michelle, we know, is a 49ers fan as well as a Steelers fan, and she looks at things very closely with San Francisco, and Ricky Pearsall is a guy that I've started to look at more. And again, wide receiver 45 on the board. I think this is criminally low. I know you have Jawan Jennings. You also have Brandon Ayuk potentially coming back well from his knee injury, but there's some uncertainty on his timeline, right, when he's going to be fully healthy. And you also have Deebo Samuel out the door. He's with the Commanders now. So now you look at it, 97 vacated targets with Samuel gone. Ayuk, I know, is kind of going to cut into those because he didn't provide a lot of those targets because he missed time down the stretch last year. So there's that, but I'm not sure when Ayuk is going to be on the field. You also look at Jawan Jennings. Is he better suited as a role player? Are they going to need him more to dedicate in the slot? Well, Ricky Pearsall is pretty versatile. they can use him, get him in the open field. Remember, he's a first-round pick. We were scratching our heads in 2024 when this happened. Oh, what are they doing here? Why are they going after this pick? Well, it was because they knew Deebo was out the door. And I think they wanted someone who could replace Deebo Samuel and take on that hybrid role, but also be quick, get open. And so far, the reviews are kind of nice and shiny here with Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy now not worrying about his contract. We've seen some good chemistry develop. And Ricky Persson, when you get a kind of scary moment like he had last year off the field with the shooting incident, it's not going to just go in right away, right? And be like, I'm settling into the field, I'm going to make plays. And there was a crowd last year. Even with Ayuk going down, you had Samuel kind of cutting into it. And the thing was that Samuel wasn't all that effective. Ayuk was hurt. Jennings was basically their default guy. Now, there is a scenario here, if Ayuk needs more time, that he's going to be right up there with George Kittle and Juwan Jennings as the top 3 targets, not named Christian McCaffrey here for Brock Purdy. But I think Persala has definitely got a good value here. I would rather take him right now than Ayuk because that knee injury seems pretty serious, and I don't know when you'll get him back at full speed. It could be very much like a TJ Hawkinson situation where he misses a good chunk of the first part of the season, comes back, then you don't know exactly how he's going to help, but I think he could be more of an asset down the stretch and in the playoffs. And again, if Ricky Persall gets hot, then you can maybe trade him when Ayuk gets in that situation. But he's going to be a great asset for you no matter how you look at it in fantasy football. Too talented. The 49ers are really high on him. The chemistry is there. They have a nice increased role ready for his skill set, which is ample. He can get open all over the field. He can do a lot of things that Samuel did. And that element is going to be returned here in the Kyle Shanahan offense with Purdy at the controls. So there you have the guys that I'm going to bang the table for. You should too. These are 6 sleeper wide receivers that are undervalued right now in drafts, and they could change, right? Go up the board. But right now, if you're drafting, you're getting close to drafting before we see training camp go into full swing. Some of these things get affected up or down. These are the guys that are the values that we're going to look at most, and there'll be more values that emerge here. Take advantage of 2 things. Rising stars that still have a place to go and skyrocket, and guys that people are down on because they had disappointing seasons last year. They can only go up and rebound if the talent and the scheme says it's going to be right. So that's how you look at the must-draft sleepers. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting show as training camps get closer and moves are being made. Hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. We'll be back to close the week with Michelle back, and we'll break down the Minnesota Vikings and their 3 key takes for the 2025 offseason. Until then, bye, y'all.